This video was sponsored by Brilliant. The year was 2014. The 8th console generation had just arrived. They told us the games would be incredible. They lied. Watch Dogs? Whack. Destiny? Whack. Assassin's Creed Unity? Whack. Launch catastrophes and immense disappointments made 2014 one of the most infamous years for gaming in recent memory. So, telling you that Monolith's surprise entry to the AAA scene, their new Lord of the Rings open-world action-adventure won Game of the Year, really isn't saying much. Nearly 10 years on, many of the games that defined 2014's disastrous lineup have been partially rehabilitated. Unity runs properly. It's good now, they say. And Watch Dogs? Well, it was never that bad. But Shadow of Mordor's situation is different. Is it so easy to venerate 2014's victor in a world still familiar with launch disasters, but also one graced with masterpieces on a yearly basis? In a world where its sequel exists, and big games are cheaper and more accessible than ever? In a world so much more weary of open-world action-adventures? The answer is no. It's not so easy. It's complicated, because in some ways, this game is awful, and time has made those flaws cut ever deeper. In many ways, I think among its greatest strengths are overlooked, and in just one way, I think it's one of the best games ever made, even now. And the Nemesis system is only part of it. So let's begin. Afterlife, but not in death. Talion is banished from death, cast adrift between the worlds of light and dark, bound by a curse within the walls of Arda. He finds himself drawn to the faint glow of a familiar corpse and the knife by its side. He holds it, then he holds the sword it used to be, to train with the corpse on the Black Gate of Mordor. He is Dirhael, Talion's son. Soon, he will be dead. But why? Well, as Galadriel narrates in typical Lord of the Rings fashion, it probably has something to do with Middle-earth's Robbie Rotten, Sauron. But the true reason is Monolith's. This is a revenge story, Middle-earth's John Wick. And I don't see any dogs around, do you? So it'll be his family that dies. Not exactly an original motive, but Monolith do have a few ideas to help deliver the impact. Though of course it is you who is being trained in the basics of attacks and counters. Talion is training Dirhael. He is inexperienced and overconfident, and he needs to be reminded of that for when the time comes. Then the time comes. And so you share Talion's worry. You wonder when he'll make a mistake. With each Uruk, you wonder if this will be the one that gets him. You feel relief that he wins, but you continue to fear the moment that this pride is crushed. It's Talion's wife, Yorith, who teaches stealth. You want me to stealth kill my wife? But no. It's a flower sent all the way from Gondor, in a criminally smooth conjunction of mechanical and narrative exposition. Like Dirhael as the son, Yorith is a touch more than the idyllic wife archetype. We learn in her last moments that she chose to come with Talion to the Black Gate, to be with him despite her father's disapproval, despite the conditions here, and that she wants to leave. Soon, Talion says in a half-hearted attempt at consoling her. Soon, she repeats, having heard it all before. It's his fault his family are at the Black Gate. Guilt. To make what happens next a touch more galling. There are no introductions, there's no extravagance. The camera shares Talion's helplessness as the boot and sword of the Black Hand passes over Dirhael to his mother's screams, and then to her. And by the time it reaches Talion, he seems to accept his death, and you understand why. But he is banished from death. The wraith he's bound to explains what needs to be done to break this curse. Find the one who cast it, the Black Hand of Sauron. And that's all he needed to hear. Monolith earned this fucking title drop. That was Nathan Grigg's metal remix of the Ringverse. Somebody get that man a fucking medal. Oh, and it's good to be back. To reviewing title drops on Whitelight, I mean. It's been a while, but it's always pleasant to return to Shadow of Mordor 2, because the introduction is both effective and concise. We're given a powerful will for revenge in less than 10 minutes. In the next 5, we're gonna see the map, the bow, we're gonna interrogate orcs for intel, and then we're let loose in Mordor. Thank you, Monolith. But what about Mordor? Well, it's very much Mordor. Everything is dead or dying or soon to be. Everything is sharp and jagged, from the structures to the rocks to the mountains and the metal, and all the metal is rusted. The iron veins make the cliffs look wounded, flesh-like patches picked raw, and the ground bursts and spits steam in the wake of Mount Doom's rising heat. They get the tone right. This is a land of death, but that does not make it boring to look at or to play in, because it's not quite the Mordor we know. Monolith make a number of very wise changes both to establish canon and to its popular portrayals as vast, barren, brown plains. Step 1. Ignoring the plains part. Mordor is aggressively not flat. It is scarred by deep canyons from end to end, creating bridges to cross, walls to climb, and cliffs to jump from, or to fall from. And as not flat as it is also not empty, because the second thing they did was ignoring the notion that Sauron's occupation of Udun had been the status quo for 1,000 years, and suggesting instead that it only just started, like a week ago. So the landscape is still littered with elven ruins, not yet dust, adding depth, history, and variance. The earth has not yet been stripped of its resources, and the means of Sauron's wicked industry dominate the Black Road, with immense cranes above, rocks sent down slides, and carts sat filled with ore. The late-game Sea of Nirn is still verdant, and though in Udun the bellowing of the mountain has seared the sky red, it is yet to erupt, and ash has not yet buried all its colors. The white of Gondor, the green of what little vegetation is yet to choke, the sun that is not yet blotted out, that on occasion portrays a normal daylight which highlights these natural colors. Still, it rains in Mordor, and there is still water on the ground that is yet to boil. It only takes a closer look to see the cracks in Shadow of Mordor's graphical makeup. Terrain textures are badly outdated, and reflections reflect nothing, which is made painfully apparent by larger pools. And yet, when you look at the game as it is usually seen, the picture is completely convincing. The daylight color, the shadows, and the impression of the reflections of water. Mordor does not show its age, not unless you look for the wrinkles. The finishing touch to the Land of Shadow are its strongholds, its vast and monstrous structures where orcs and captains gather in their hordes. You might wonder, what's impressive about a fort in an open-world game? I'd answer, their ability to develop the setting, while being varied, inventive, and intimidating. Durthang was once an arm of Gondor, still standing tall for you to avenge its craters from above. It's divided by a canyon but connected by a bridge, where combat naturally flows as orcs pour in from both sides and the player uses the ledge to their advantage. Uruk's Hollow, far from here, is a ramshackle village. It's sprawling and disorganized, and most welcoming to the stealth approach, as sightlines are easily broken and roofs are easily traversed, while the vast pit between the high platforms of Sauron's Gate welcomes all-out war. The benefit to the picture up close or towering in the distance is the same as their benefit to gameplay. Mordor is not pretty, but it looks damn good. You truly get the sense that if you weren't playing as Talion, this would be a terrifying place to be. But you are playing as Talion, and so you're not scared in Mordor, you're angry with it. This game is about revenge, and slaying monsters in bad blood is the fantasy Monolith aim to deliver, so our interactions with the world around us are designed with the intention to make us feel powerful. It's got Assassin's Creed stealth and Arkham's combat. Perhaps taken with the intention to make us feel powerful would be the more appropriate term. People back then were quick to point out Mordor's striking similarities to other popular franchises, and if Monolith wanted to avoid such comparison, they certainly didn't help their case. It's as if they were trying to make you think of other games as they proudly display their towers to climb and their map with icons on it, despite the fact that most of those icons are collectibles or dynamic events, not side quests, despite the fact that climbing every tower in the game will take you no more than 2 minutes combined, and despite the fact that Mordor isn't a large open world. It's dense, and entirely uninterested in the bloat of scale. This isn't a Ubisoft game in the sense we now fear, nor is it a thoughtless amalgamation of what was popular at the time. What it is heavily inspired by some very good ideas and some very mid. The stealth. Yes, there is a surface-level climbing system. No, it's not like Assassin's Creed. It's like the new Assassin's Creeds, which aren't like Assassin's Creed, and conform instead to a generic AAA stealth template. There is crouching, detection gauges, bushes to hide in, instant stealth takedowns, and short, brutal animations. You've seen this in Tomb Raider to The Last of Us to Far Cry. What's interesting about Shadow of Mordor's rendition is just how far it goes to emphasize the power fantasy. Detection rate is slow, detection radius is small, detection propagation is weak, which means an orc needs to be very close to another orc to pass along their detection. And detection leniency is very high, which means there is about 3 seconds after being detected where you can still stealth kill. Your crouch run is as fast as your normal run, killing is silent, running makes noise but it will never alert orcs soon enough to help them. Cover is everywhere, bushes are everywhere, the environment frequently presents opportunities like Morgai flies to sow terror, Caragors to release from their cages, and explosives to detonate. And don't imagine these are tactical options that might slow your rampage, they're a convenience. Press button to delete threat with no complications. Enemies won't sound the alarm, so nothing is made more difficult for Talion if he uses them, and they can be used from afar, so there is no risk that you will be detected. And if you are detected, you have a bow that slows time. Stealth is shallow and incredibly easy, and in many cases that means exactly what you think it would. It's Keller brim boring. The kills are satisfying always, but even their short length begins to feel too long when you're thoughtlessly progressing from one orc to the next, to the next, to the next, for the 50th time and deleting all threat in seconds. Strongholds add to the spectacle, but man, the basic stealth experience of Shadow of Mordor gets old. Faster than you can run, which is really fast. Fast enough to run past enemies before they see you, which is really fun. You start noticing things when you're bored. You experiment, stumbling upon the potential that existed here. Shadow of Mordor has unusually forgiving detection mechanics and an unusually powerful sandbox, so I challenge myself to kill orcs loudly, but so quickly that stealth was effectively maintained, because anyone who saw me is dead, and I was gone before anyone else could arrive. You can use explosions and flies. You can use Shadow Strike, which teleports you into an execution for 2 elf shot. Explosions and flies build combo for another instant kill, and brutalized stealth takedowns can scare nearby orcs away. Because Shadow of Mordor doesn't drop your combo when you exit combat, if you're quick, you can use throwing knives or Shadow Strike or a well-placed attack to bring your combo charge into the next encounter, and open with an execution. You can jump, because jumping gives you Elven Swiftness, and Elven Swiftness gives you combo. You can work in drains to keep up your elf shot supply for more Shadow Strikes. You can build a high stealth combo. There are ways of having fun here, sparks of potential that emerge from what's unique about Monolith's design. They will never capitalize on it. Most will never see it. None should feel the need to. And there was something else I noticed by playing with such brutal efficiency. It made sense, because it never really does make sense for Talion, a man who'll take on an army in an open fight, and who, unlike assassins, rarely has an actual reason to show restraint, to waste time hiding in bushes. The kind of stealth Monolith adapt for Talion is strong, but not compared to his other options, so when you're forced to use it, it can feel forced. As if the designers have forgotten what you can do, and it's not the last time the strength of the combat system will make you feel that way. Consider that foreshadowing. For now, I'd like to focus on the fight, the height of the power fantasy. And yeah, it's like Arkham, which makes a lot of sense. This was the system that successfully made players feel like one of the world's biggest badasses. Your attacks track heavily and deal a great deal of damage. Enemies attack slowly, telegraph clearly, and your primary method of defense is not a block or even a parry. It's a counter, which turns a block into an attack. Enemies need to be in their tens to pose the slightest threat, and therein lies the core of the power fantasy. Adding to this basic setup is your vault for repositioning and avoiding uncounterable attacks, your special combo moves that you can access when you build your combo to a particular number, your stun for stunning, your beatdown that instantly kills stunned enemies if it is completed with no interruptions, and your ground takedown which does the same to grounded enemies. It's Arkham. It did Batman justice. It changed the industry forever. So yeah, it gets the job done here. You will take on hordes and you will comfortably win. You will feel like a fucking demon, just like you would in Arkham. But just like in Arkham, the mechanical fun is in winning well, not in winning at all. It can be this easy to defeat your enemies because what you're mastering and optimizing, what you're mechanically engaging with is defeating them efficiently, and if you're so inclined, defeating them stylishly. So, how do you optimize a massacre? Well, you can target the most dangerous enemies first, for instance. You can pace your attacks to hit critical strikes, which award double combo. You can correctly judge that you have enough time to interrupt an enemy attack instead of countering them. And you can correctly judge that you have enough time to complete a beatdown or a ground takedown. One of Monolith's tweaks to the Arkham formula is allowing the ground takedown to be cancelled. In Arkham, you're committed, so if you misjudge, you're gonna get hit. You're gonna take damage and drop your combo. That's a big punishment, and the problem was that until the player developed a highly accurate instinct for how likely they are to be interrupted, it just wasn't worth the risk. The ground takedown tended to be something that players of average experience used only at the end of a fight, but almost never within it. The move almost disappeared from the moveset, but by reducing the punishment to wasted time, Shadow of Mordor makes the ground takedown relevant for the average player. That's a win, right out of the black gate. Another is the way Monolith handles combos. To put it simply, the size of your combo affects the strength of your sword. Not in the sense of doing 5% more damage. Talion takes the sword with his second hand and starts hitting orcs so hard they instantly stagger. That's at 16. At 30, it's an instant knockdown with almost comical force, and your Wraith Flash ability is empowered with greater range and damage. Combos in Mordor feel like a combo, a rising thing characterized by momentum, which serves as both a gratifying reward for perfect play and, well, it's not like the power fantasy needed any help, but hey, this helps. Combos are another win. Now, when it comes to enemy design, things are very familiar. Berserkers punish you for attacking head-on, so get behind them, wait to counter, or find another way. Defenders have a shield which blocks the frontal approach, and their attacks can't be countered, so you've got to drop your instincts and vault instead. Ranged enemies, meanwhile, are more common in Mordor than Gotham, but less accurate, and they pressure awareness of the arena, keeping an eye on the backline. It's an effective roster. For a time, they keep you conscious of your inputs, and away from mindless spam. They contribute challenges of button skill, and the depth of prioritizing targets. The most interesting thing Monolith does with enemy design is, well, the Nemesis system. We'll get to that. Okay, the second most interesting thing Monolith does with enemy design is that defender shields are breakable. If you break them, they become standard swordsmen and a fraction of the threat, so it is very useful to do so. How do you break them? Well, you can be really persistent with a shoulder charge, or you can use two-handed swings that will shear through shields like they were made of cloth. In a fight with lots of defenders, it can be slow in the short term but smart in the long term to use beatdowns or throwing knives or the brutalized stealth kill to build your combo to 16 quickly, or to simply set up a shoulder charge on a nearly broken shield. In the right situations, the fragility of defenders encourage unconventional decision making, and that is probably the highest praise an enemy type can receive. I'd like to highlight shoulder charges as another now common Monolith dub. They're an instant knockdown, but they require a running start. In Arkham, that was the fly kick, but Arkham dropped your combo when you exited combat, like by running, and Mordor does not, which means this move is no longer restricted to entering a fight. It can now be integrated within it, and that's very fun when you're near a ledge to bash someone off, and very efficient if you have enough time to pair it with a ground takedown. Big time commitment in return for an instant kill. Isn't that the same niche as beatdowns? Not quite. Shoulder charges make for a much quicker kill, but beatdowns contribute far more combo, and since combo in this game is mechanically desirable, there's a strong trade-off. It adds to the depth, and to my erection, because it feels fucking exquisite, and I'll do it just for that. Monolith have successfully made another of Arkham's moves relevant in basic combat. So, lastly, we have the depth of choosing the best special combo for the situation. It's Combat Brand. Thank you for watching. Okay, I'll explain myself, but in a nutshell, the balance is fucked. Execution? That's one kill. Choose your victim well, or whatever gets you the coolest animation. Wraith Flash is an AoE. It deals very little damage, and it doesn't stun for some reason. It is far stronger when empowered by a combo, so there's a situational use. Then we have Wraith Burn, that instantly kills every grounded enemy. It can be very useful if you pick your moments well, and if you've almost beaten the game, because that's about when you unlock it. Why? Wraith Burn is good, but so far there is nothing without a colossal and baffling caveat. Fire Arrow sets orcs on fire, which is usually an instant kill for the price of one elf shot. You might wonder, why spend the combo charge if I could just tilt my aim upwards and use that one elf shot to shoot them in the head? Well, maybe they're a captain who is weak to fire, a highly situational ability then. Unless you know of its hidden ability to cause Wraith Fire explosions. Wraith Fire will melt almost anything, even defenders and the strongest captains. For the low effort of finding an explosion source, you get a nuke. It's so busted that even knowing of its existence, I pledge not to use it. Thankfully, most are in the dark. The final ability is Combat Drain. You suck 4 elf shot out of an orc's head. If that orc is at low health, their head will also pop, so there's a free execution for the wisest uses. But in the famous words of girlfriend reviews, hold the fuck up a minute. 4 elf shot? That's a lot of potential damage. That's 2 shadow strikes, and then Combat Drain becomes Combat Brand. So not only do you get the 4 elf shot, you also remove the drained orc from the enemy team. And he becomes a distraction. Excluding the Wraith nuke, there are now 0 times Combat Brand is not the best special combo in the game. Yeah, Monolith didn't quite get this whole balance thing right. But if you've played this game, you know something's not adding up. Because you used Execution, despite the fact that it is always objectively the wrong move. Why? You know. Because it looks cool. And let's not risk understatement here. That shit goes harder than cast iron. These kills aren't just cathartic, they're creative. It takes imagination to come up with some of this shit. Damn. I hope the dev who did is okay. But thank you though. It's cool, so I'll use it. That's intrinsic motivation. And it's not going to help the dull fart that is Wraith Flash, nor will it introduce Wraith Burn any earlier. But now, there's a semblance of balance to our choice of special combos. We will soon find out that Shadow of Mordor owes a lot to the way it looks and feels. I would go so far as to argue that these qualities are what save it. Plot twist, implication being it needed saving, and that might come as a surprise. They took Arkham, and Arkham is good, and improved it, which is more good. But there is another side of the coin. The things Mordor didn't take from Arkham. City. Yes, Arkham City, because it wasn't really until City that Arkham combat truly became deep. The Foundation, established an asylum of attacks and counters with the occasional stuns, vaults, and ground takedowns, is well thought out and effective. But alone, it's just not all that much. There isn't a lot of room to optimize it. There's not a lot of potential for self-expression or variation, and despite its deserved critical acclaim, this was news to no one. The challenge mode could be mastered in hours, and it kinda got memed on for being style over substance. And guess what? The casual player couldn't give a fuck. There was enough here to satisfy them. But the player of greater experience, and greater experience in this case really isn't that much, would quickly begin to find themselves mechanically disengaged. Then came City. The difference between them seems almost invisible at first glance. Looks like a few new enemies and a few new special combos. But the player who wanted something more could find in the details a treasury. Gadgets, once reserved for mediocre puzzles, each now had a unique combat utility. You could blow multiple enemies up with a well-placed explosive gel. You could freeze one enemy at a time. You could electrocute shields and send enemies with metal hammers into a frenzy. And if you let your combo reach 12, Free Flow Focus would re-characterize gadgets once again. Batarang and Backclaw, both single-target knockdowns before, now were distinct, with the Backclaw's slam gaining an AoE, and the Batarang, like the freeze grenade, now hitting multiple targets. The balance, admittedly, became increasingly questionable. Explosive Gel was almost Wraithfire level busted, but you can imagine what more than 5 competently balanced moves, each with their own utility, might do for the skill ceiling. A lot. Talion, meanwhile, has the bow, whose application is very useful but not especially interesting, and an extremely situational throwing knife. City's second big idea was making enemy types transferable from one enemy to another through dropped weapons. Somebody else could pick up a dropped shield, or knife, or gun. The advanced player would work to ensure that didn't happen, with awareness and positioning, or by spending a special combo to destroy it. Good arena control makes a huge difference in Arkham City, and it doesn't in Mordor. So yeah, it's basically Arkham, but with a skill ceiling of half the height of City, Origins, and Night, and combat that here is under twice the pressure, because there's twice as much combat. We're in fucking Mordor. You're constantly fighting, and that makes for a simple equation. Eventually, it wears out. Perhaps that'll take so long for some that what I'm saying rings hollow, but for many, perhaps for most who had already played in Arkham, the game's timing challenges will become second nature. And eventually, perhaps too soon, there will be nothing left to master. There was nothing left for me. What saves it from ever reaching the low of boredom is the way it looks and feels. Its competence in this regard is astounding. The seamless flow from move to move is a quality Mordor inherits from Arkham, like a slow walk as your default movement speed, portraying in Batman confidence, and in Talion something closer to rage. Then there's the swish of the sword sheath, a bow tie of style placed on a well-fought encounter. And there's the way an enemy's stance is broken down systematically. First they stand, then a stagger, which could have them on their knees, and finally, a knockdown. Ground takedowns are as creative and cathartic as the executions, and they, like executions, adapt seamlessly to distance, angle, and relative stance. There is slow-mo and hit stop to add weight to your swings and to highlight the most gruesome details. It is strange for a medieval sword fighter that devastating explosions are a staple of combat, being so powerful, so common, and so easy to use, but they uphold the trend. Those closest to the blast are ragdolled, but they're the lucky ones. Some of those burning crawl, others stumble away. And there are the many things you can do to your enemies that don't necessarily have a place in the balance, instead contributing to a sort of violent sandbox. Enemies can be shanked during a grab, and their throats finally cut. There's a dismount kill from Caragors that makes a missile out of you, and there is a button that blows up their heads. There is a button that blows up their heads. What the fuck kind of game are we playing? I'll tell you. We're playing a game about revenge, whose central fantasy is enacting revenge. Shadow of Mordor intends to make you feel like a man whose family was killed in front of him, and who now has the means to punish anyone even remotely responsible. I think what's especially effective about the violence in Shadow of Mordor is that it is rooted in and empowered by character. When Talion needlessly delivers a killing blow twice, or 3 times in the most brutal circumstances and roars when he does, you understand where it comes from. Not just because you can remember what happened in the introduction, but because that tone is reinforced on every level of the game's aesthetic. The mud, rain, and relentless hate of the world you're bound to. The violence hits harder because of that, and you can feel the difference when you turn to Shadow of War, where the events that created Talion are far more distant from him, and from the focus of the game. There, the violence is just violence, more functional than felt. Here, you feel what drives it. I would argue that at times, Mordor goes harder than Doom. Yeah, so until such a time that effect wears down for you, this combat just won't die. It just won't fall below a 7 out of 10, because this might get old, but this never will. And of course, Talion is not meant to be the only one with a motive for revenge. The player is to have one too, or many. The most interesting thing Monolith does with enemy design is impressive, even for them. The team behind Fear, an FPS from 2005 known today for its groundbreaking implementation of artificial intelligence. Monolith knew how to craft an enemy, and the Orcs of Mordor gave them a chance to push the boundaries forward again. They called it the Nemesis system, a fully dynamic, AI-driven revenge story generator that begins at first contact with one of Mordor's 25 randomly generated captains. An ambush, or a chance encounter, or maybe you sort them out. You will find a name and a body, selected randomly from a staggeringly large pool of names and bodies. And then there's an introductory monologue, some written and delivered with all the bile you'd expect from the twisted spawn of Mordor, and some with a much goofier tone that both provides the game a valuable source of levity and a far broader contrast, making each personality stand out that much more. Serious or absurd, the content of the monologue is a threat, or an insult, or anything that will make you want to kill them, and that will help to convince you that they are not just an enemy, but a character, a task at which Monolith ultimately succeeds. Some orcs can seem inorganically fixated on their one distinguishing trait, like hornblowers, who for some reason feel the need to refer to their horn at every opportunity, and some orcs don't seem to have any distinguishing traits beyond the status effect applied to their weapon. But perhaps, compared to the constant extravagance of orcs in Shadow of War, restraint was a good thing, because believability matters. When you can buy into the illusion that these captains who always give you a short-form reason to want them dead are an organic part of the world, the fight becomes more than a purely mechanical exercise. It takes on a narrative dimension. You want to fuck them as a character over. It's like the difference between knowing you're fighting a bot online and knowing you're fighting a real person. Every win or loss, the rivalry itself are more real. It's an incredibly impressive thing, and its potential is remarkable. But I do think discussions of this game often miss the forest for the trees. Yes, when the Nemesis system performs at the peak of its potential, the results can be incredible. But most of the time, you simply meet a captain, fight them, and kill them. It happens often, and it happens unpredictably. So, most of the time, what the Nemesis system is doing for the game is keeping it interesting. You could be running through Mordor, sneaking through a stronghold. You could be in a side mission, and a captain can change the way things go. They could be weak or strong. They could be alone or with backup. They could have any combination of strengths and weaknesses, like a fear of certain beasts, a hatred of certain behaviors, or immunity to certain tactics. It is a testament to this strength that the Warchief missions in Shadow of Mordor's campaign are its most varied. There are 5 Warchiefs in Sauron's army. They're captains, but stronger. And amongst the captain ranks are their bodyguards, all randomly chosen. The Warchief missions are simply confrontations with them. There are 10 in this game, and you'll never get tired. One encounter ends instantly because the boss man is terrified of Talion. The next, in the very same space, involves a hatred of Caragors, which immediately puts me on the back foot. But both of his bodyguards are scared of fire. One flees over a bridge and has a workplace accident. The other slips away from me, leaving only a fight at the top of the castle with the Warchief himself. The fight was not very good, but this mission was fantastic. It told its own story, because I could to a degree believe the captains as characters, and it played in a way that I could not predict. So you can see how a captain or 3 might make that side mission a hell of a lot more interesting than freeing 5 slaves would otherwise have been, or that sprint through Mordor. It is a testament in itself that these stories happened on my 3rd playthrough, by which time the Nemesis system still had shit to show me. Its ability to keep the game interesting had not faltered, or lost even a fraction of its value. So that's the forest. That's what the Nemesis system usually is, and that's its most important strength. But the Nemesis system is named and known for what happens at the peak of its potential, for its ability to progress past your first encounter with a captain into scene 2, 3, into a full dynamic story that unfolds over time. Because a captain could escape your first encounter, or you could escape and meet again. You could kill a captain and he could come back to life, or a captain could kill you and you could come back to life. Because Talion is canonically immortal, he can die, but not for long. And a comprehensive memory system will then tie one scene and the next together. If you ran away or they interpreted your separation as cowardice, they'll say so. If you exploited their fear last time, they'll criticize you for it. Whether they're bandaged, scarred, burned, or have a metal plate drilled into their heads depends entirely on how you kill them. And if you kill them enough times, they could even develop brain damage. It's sophisticated. As technology, it's remarkable. Importantly, it's almost always convincing, and that means you can buy into the illusion that Encounter 1 and Encounter 2 are parts of a real story. Now, your success in the consequent battle has actual narrative stakes. You want to win. You might do something differently out of spite or mercy. The power of your violence multiplies, and this could go on to produce a dynamic, player-driven revenge story, separate from the script, a nemesis, a black hand of your own. I am running out of synonyms for incredible. Of course, that is, when this kind of thing actually happens. The trees of the Nemesis system do have their problems. To understand them, we're going to review something else entirely. The campaign. You'll see what I mean by the end. Now, the campaign in Shadow of Mordor is at an immediate disadvantage. The Nemesis system will not work with scripted content. You can't have push-crimp mouse molester sharp halfway into an emotional conversation with an NPC, which means every mission that isn't a War Chief mission can't use the most interesting thing about Shadow of Mordor's gameplay. But hey, there's nothing wrong with scripted content given the right design. Unfortunately, what it was given was very little thought and very few resources. Don't look forward to strong boss fights or adventures in far-off places or unique gameplay scenarios. The height of the campaign's objective design is 2 low-budget chases and 2 escort missions. Otherwise, you will engage with the open world as you normally would. The difference is, all of it's slower, because you can't use elven swiftness when you're following an NPC, and all of it's smaller, because the campaign's idea of an interesting encounter is a small handful of orcs. The campaign scripts the game into a lobotomy, and perhaps they could have smoothed that over with an effective story, but they don't have one to tell. Performances are excellent. We're talking a Gollum so good as Gollum that half the people didn't realize he wasn't the original Gollum.
We must have it back. We must have it.
Alistair Duncan, known for Men of Presence, who captures elvish pride, grace, wrath, and a deathly rasp at once.
There will be more battles, Talion, but we will find our peace.
He brings orcs low with thunderous commands, which somehow raises the power fantasy even further.
You little fuck.
And then there's Troy Baker, who is Troy Baker. Problem is, they don't have much to say. Plot and character beats are spread exceedingly thin, over 5 to 10 minute missions, and relationships with NPCs are quickly abandoned by the story before they can amount to anything of significant impact. Hirgon was an outcast from the Black Gate. This earns him Talion's judgment, but for his tenacious efforts leading his men against the Uruk occupiers, a respect develops. Soon we recover Hirgon's wife, Arryn, a fate Talion knows with pain that he will never share. Hirgon organizes you and his men into a plot to destroy the Gorthar, a slave-built monument to Sauron's domination. And following 5 fucking minutes of following, we get the job done. Hirgon nor his ill-equipped men will survive Sauron's retaliation. What's interesting is that Hirgon knows this. He did it so his men could live and die with purpose. Do they die? Do they even attempt to escape? Who knows? This story, spread across 3 missions, is the single most complex interaction with any character in Shadow of Mordor. It leaves a mark on the world, but not on Talion, missing the point of stories that feature brief interactions with a succession of characters entirely, like The Last of Us, Metro 2033, and, Lord of the Rings. The dialogue is decent, that can't be ignored. Talion's rage brings life and conflict, even unnecessary conflict, to conversations with a conniving orc ratbag. And Gollum, who doesn't exactly inspire trust. The contrasting absence of rapport between Talion and Celebrimbor is not unnatural given Talion's state of mind, and that both men are soldiers. But neither is it ideal. Celebrimbor's character is as insubstantial as his body, and learning more about him to fill that void by tracking down lost artifacts comes to serve as motivation for over 6 missions. Let me tell you, it is not strong enough to motivate 6 fucking missions. There's only so much to learn. Celebrimbor was an elvish Oppenheimer. He crafted the Rings of Power under the deceiving guidance of Anatar, Sauron's most exquisite lie. Celebrimbor was betrayed, forced to craft the One in the crack of doom. But then, he took the ring, used it to rebel, but the ring was loyal only to one. It's an interesting story, and it's cool to watch, but it's not a long one. Split into 6, each flashback is a slither padded out with action that looks cool but means nothing, and minor insignificant details, many of which will be repeated in the next one, or have been repeated from the last one. And this is what's expected to justify the place of entire quest lines in the plot. Gollum's in the early game, and Torvin's in the late game, who will teach us to fight a Caragor, which will teach us to fight a Graug, which will teach us to fight a stronger Graug, which will lead us to another fucking flashback. In a personal revenge story, we spend half our time chasing glorified Dark Souls item descriptions. Incidentally, almost all the missions that lead you to such a flashback follow a similar formula. You're led to a cave, you find the artifact, and you then fight or flee an attack from a new animal-type enemy, likely armed with a new skill. Over a quarter of the campaign is flashback missions. It's not a small problem, but the biggest problem with the matter of your actions making sense is that the campaign has absolutely no clue who the fuck you're playing as. Are you Talion, sword-bearing Doomslayer, a force in one man to reckon with Sauron? Or are you Talion, resurrected Ranger of Gondor, who has a few cool powers that occasionally come in handy? The smart answer would be the first one, because that's what the gameplay says. But there is no one answer. The campaign flips like a fucking pancake between these two identities, in moments encouraging the quiet approach against a mere handful of orcs, and in the next, asking you to take out a war chief in his stronghold by yourself. There's a mission earlier in the game in which you are made to gather plants, to create poison, to kill the orcs in a stronghold to allow Hirgon's men time to free his wife. You could have just stabbed the orcs and skipped the herbology course, but Talion never thinks to bring that up, and in all likelihood you will never use poison again. It goes on. In the third Celebrimbor flashback mission, you're swarmed by ghouls, tens of them, maybe 100, and you will kill them all. In the fourth Celebrimbor flashback mission, Talion behaves as if alerting a similar number of ghouls would mean certain death, and when he inevitably does alert them, we're expected to run for our lives. It still goes on. Sometime before, the Hammer of Sauron will arrive in Mordor to punish the destruction of the Gorthau, and to demand the Grave Walker's head, and Talion will walk out in front of him and demand he take the head himself.
Ranger from the Black Gate. Where was your bravery when we bled your wife and gutted your son?
Cool moment, bad fight. You're mostly fighting the orcs, not the hammer, to build execution charge to use on the hammer, but that's besides the point. Point is, who is Talion? The inconsistency is a bad thing in itself, but when it swings towards underestimating Talion, it inevitably leads to dull gameplay, and confusion as to why we're doing what we are.
There are more plants ahead. Follow me.
Shadow of Mordor makes the smartest move a game with a weak campaign can. It doesn't get in your way. Missions are short, so not always being sweet doesn't so grievously matter. And there is more to say about it, specifics in the late game, but for now, the reason we brought it up in the first place. Because this isn't an isolated incident, it's a trend. Shadow of Mordor has a weak grasp on the power of the character you control, and the most tragic victim of them all is the Nemesis system. Captains should be difficult. Why? Well, for one, because if no captain is tough enough to make their strengths and weaknesses worth leveraging, then the tactical, intentional play Monolith wishes the player would engage with will not be engaged with. And two, because if you're winning fights too easily, not many captains are going to make it to the second scene, and that dynamic revenge story might go unwritten. You should not finish this game with 10 nemesis. That would harm the meaning of any one. But I finished it without any, multiple times, and I'm not alone. So did many enough that the lack of difficulty is widely considered to be the biggest problem with Shadow of Mordor. So why is it too easy? Well, it certainly doesn't help that there isn't a difficulty slider, or that you already feel strong when you start the game and are then given access to 7 separate progression systems that, if used, will make you many times stronger. But ultimately, it's not a matter of numbers, it's a matter of design. Captains don't attack very often. They don't attack quickly. They can block you, but not often. They can interrupt you, but not often. Some can resist your vault, but none can resist your stun, which makes it very easy to bully them into a combo. You attack until they're grounded, you ground takedown, then execute with the charge you've so far amassed, and repeat. If you get a captain on their own in this game, they are fucked. And it's not very hard to make that happen, or for it to happen by chance. Monolith completely failed to make Arkham work on captains, simply because of balance. Strengths and weaknesses add to this problem. Early game, even into the mid game, captains tend to have far more significant weaknesses than strengths. Things like instant kill vulnerability to stealth takedowns, or a fear of Caragors or fire, which are not exactly hard to come by. Hatreds tend to only prolong their misery. More health won't stop the systems that allow me to bully them, and in this way, hatreds also don't lead to tactical play. It's always quicker to fight through them than to avoid them. The strongest strengths, meanwhile, seen only in the later hours that offer complete immunity to certain forms of attack, still create a captain which you are going to bully, just in a more specific way. If they're a combat master, maybe you'll have to repeatedly hit them from stealth. If that doesn't sound very fun to you, you're right. It's not. The closest Shadow of Mordor gets to boss-type difficulty is immunity states, not movesets. A simple and significant problem in itself, but the point is, it usually doesn't even work. It's difficult to find a difficult captain in this game, and traits most often end up making captains ridiculously weak. The game does make its attempts at helping the situation. One of them is the humiliation. Health is weird in Shadow of Mordor. Your health bar does not contain all your health. You don't die when it runs out. You fall to your knees, and the specific orc who dealt the blow will try to finish you. It's a QTE, and it's easy. And after 2 of them, then you die. Perhaps 2 was excessive. Perhaps you should only have had 1, but the idea is brilliant, because it makes death and defying it personal. And what it also allows Monolith to do is to have a captain walk away. say you're not worth the effort. So the captain survives, and you have twice the motivation for revenge than if they had just killed you. Of course, for this to happen, they actually have to hit you. Another thing is retreats. If a captain's scared or tired of a losing battle, they'll run at a comically fast pace. And the wisdom is clear. If they get away, we get a second scene. Unfortunately, this is soon counteracted by abilities like Pin in Place, which stops them from moving, and Shadow Strike, which moves you to them. And so given the high chance that you will catch up to them, retreats actually end up making their deaths more likely. When a captain is broken, marked by the color green, they are vulnerable to grabs, so if you're near a drop from which to lob them, you have won. If you're not near a drop, you've still won. It'll just take a few moments longer, as the captain fleeing at Mach 2 completely abandons any other Uruks in the initial encounter, which leaves your imminent bullying campaign free of interruptions. Self-restriction is an uncomfortable solution at the best of times, but in this case, I find it almost untenable. Letting the other guy win is not exactly conducive to the kind of emotions a revenge story is supposed to evoke. Self-restriction, to the degree that it's possible, kinda defeats the point, and you're only gonna get better. You're only gonna get stronger. The wonderful moments of met potential are only gonna get rarer. Soon, they won't come at all. For me, they're a distant memory. And it comes to be that many of the things that Monolith would like to make sense in terms of balance and game design just don't. Having put the hammer down, Talion is ambushed by a traveler from Nirn, Lothariel, who brings an invitation for Celebrimbor. How could she know of him? Interesting. Talion accepts her escort to Nirn, and there her ragged queen Marwen sends us on a cryptic hunt for an artifact at the end of a cave, and a dwarf, who will lead us to an artifact at the end of a cave. Brilliant. More interesting is Nirn itself. Now, I probably don't need to state the obvious. It's green. Da-ba-dee-ba-ba-da, which makes it a highly effective contrast. And as green goes, it's really good green. The foliage is well modeled and well textured. The color and lighting are convincing. Nirn is beautiful today, and the strongholds keep up the standard. The village is an impressive remix of Uruk's Hollow, but to the east is a sprawling fortress of ancient stone cast in the vertical mold of Durthang. It's striking, even from distance as great as the stronghold in the west, Nirn Fishery, where fishing happens, which gives it an especially unique visual character and answers a question: where the orcs get their food from. One of Monolith's successes with Mordor is the impression of life, a discussion I thought would be best left to Nirn. With the fishery, there is a sense of logic, of intention that helps to build this impression of life, and likewise we see their source of wood and stone, and where both are stored. We observe Uruk fortifications hastily nailed onto old human and elven structures. We see that there is a goal behind their use of slave labor, in Nirn to finish the job the sea started, to erase the remnants of Celebrimbor's rebellion, and in Udun to mine metal for the construction of the Gorthar. There are smaller and simpler things, like their sources of drink, shelter, of clothing, warmth, entertainment, and practice, like the fact that some slaves try to escape, and orcs try to catch them. That their patrols are sometimes large and sometimes small, that they converse, refer to things that happen in the story, and find inventive ways to exert their evil. And at its most literal, what builds the impression of life is that there's lots of life. There are Caragors hunting in packs, held captive in cages, basking in the sun, and fighting anything that irritates them, which is everything they see. Yeah, they're cats. And it's remarkable how well that's captured in the details of their behavior. They circle, pounce, swat, and snarl. There are Graugs, who are somehow even more upset, rampaging throughout Mordor, eating orcs, smashing orcs, punching orcs, and throwing rocks at orcs. There are ghouls, who emerge suddenly from the earth in droves, butcher and leave just as quickly. Mordor is of death, but it is made to feel alive by the shadows that lie within it. Even into the late game, you just don't get tired of this place. It's the dwarf you're sent to find, Torvin, who provides a formal introduction to the art of hunting beasts. In a questline justified by a trinket at the end of a cave that tells us nothing, but it's the journey here that works, if not its place in the story. There's a fun rapport between Torvin's devil-may-care philosophy and the self-serious Talion. You compete for kills on Caragors, and eventually work your way up to the challenge of the Graug. The idea is you have to create a distraction for the Graug, sneak up behind it, stab it in the leg, mount one of the Caragors that attracts, and fight the Graug with the mobility of your Caragor and with the other Caragors. It's very dynamic, a lot can go wrong, and at each step of the way it makes you feel like a badass. The fantasy of the monster slayer is not something Monolith had to nail, but it seems there is no limit to how much they can impress in the simple matter of coolness. And Graug hunting works especially well in the moment for the story with Torvin too, because his plan fails. You get the Caragor, lure the Graug towards him, he stabs it in the head, and it just stands back up. So Talion is expected to improvise, to think like Torvin, and he climbs the Graug's back and brands it, and we get to start turning some Uruk character models into Uruk textures, if you know what I'm saying. You don't need me to tell you that this is fun to play, or What really lands is that it's fun for Talion. This is the first good thing he's felt since he died, and it comes as a surprise for him and for the player. It's a touching moment that goes nowhere, of course, but it's the highlight of Nirn, and you take what you can get with this game. What's weird about it is the placement, the timing of it. You've been able to ride Caragors for the entire game. There are so many Caragors that it's not unlikely you've done so. You've certainly fought them, you've probably dodged their pounces, and yet still, with only a couple hours left to go, we learn the pounce counter as if it's lesson 1 in the class of Caragors, and not an expert's technique that simply makes the process quicker. The novice-master dynamic feels out of place, not to mention out of character for someone as impatient as Talion. But here's where it gets really weird. Having concluded Torvin's quest, you're allowed to unlock Shadow Mount. Shadow Mount allows you to instantly mount anything for 2 elf shot. Huh? So I can now teleport into possession of a super weapon for free. Yeah, it's basically free because I can just drain the beast to get my elf shot back. Being able to win any confrontation quickly, efficiently, and mindlessly is another one of those things like Wraithfire that you have to pretend just doesn't exist. But worse is that it makes everything we've just learned completely fucking pointless. Breaking a Graug was fun and made the subsequent power trip feel earned, and there was a value to having something in this world that feels above you, that might encourage you to take a step back. 20 minutes later, you can upgrade it all away. Why? And it's not just Torvin's quest that's odd about Nirn. You do get the sense that we're playing a first draft, with bizarre dialogue choices where Celebrimbor is silent for ages, and then speaks suddenly to state the obvious.
Torvin is too quiet. Something must be wrong.
Go to him, Talion.
In a baffling incident, they repeat themselves too. Talion praises Marwen's strategy, Celebrimbor agrees, then Talion praises Marwen's strategy again, and Celebrimbor agrees again. Oh yeah, and it turns out Marwen has been possessed by Saruman the whole time. He was using her to manipulate Celebrimbor into building an army to destroy Sauron. And when we free Marwen, we still need the army to fight the Black Hand, so nothing changes. What was the point in that? It's better than nothing, but why is it so close to nothing? And the worst part is the mission where you actually unlock the ability to brand orcs. We're told that our answers to unlocking Celebrimbor's true strength lie in a nearby fort. We arrive to find Marwen's men awaiting execution. What we need is what they carry. To save them, Talion decides he's going to brand the archers. Do you see the problem? Talion didn't unlock branding by finding the artifact. Talion simply decided that he can brand in order to get the artifact, and the artifact meant nothing. We're playing a first draft. So, Talion can brand now, and branding is very cool. Slowly building an army in secret, activating them all at once. I know it's cool doesn't seem like concrete critique. I know I can't prove it's cool, but it is cool, and that's important. In the same way it was for execution. It's almost never worth branding from stealth. It'll take you 5 times longer to set up an ambush than it would to kill every orc involved yourself. If you ever do it, you'll do it because it's cool. It's a toy. It's fun. Part of the violent sandbox. And perhaps that's all it was ever meant to be when used on fodder enemies, but it's with the captains that Monolith set their sights a little higher for branding, and failed. Why brand a captain? The answer to that is because you need to. You're required to brand all 5 war chiefs in Nirn to beat the game. It can be worth branding one of their bodyguards too, because then the branded bodyguard can replace the war chief if you accidentally kill him in the encounter. Once you've got all 5, the fun of fucking around with eternally obedient puppets is the only worthwhile thing branding can do for you. It's almost never worth sending an orc to fight another orc, because it's almost always quicker to fight that orc yourself, and safer. Now you're not putting an allied captain at risk. Because branded captains are of little use to you, it's almost never worth helping them ascend the ranks, and you won't interact with them randomly either. The biggest problem with branding in Shadow of Mordor is that it amounts to an ending to a captain's story. Your relationship with that orc can no longer develop. They can no longer exhibit unique behavior. They can't talk to you or ambush you. They can't defect. They can't help you independently of your commands. If you kill them, they can't come back. Branding makes the game less interesting, and if you want to get the best out of the Nemesis system, then you have every incentive to avoid it. Once again, something in the late game that feels like a first draft. A beta build, prototyped in this game to be finalized in the next. And sadly, there is no advanced aspect of the Nemesis system that does not feel that way. There are power struggles in Shadow of Mordor, where captains will undertake a specific activity in order to gain power. This could be a trial by ordeal, a beast hunt, a duel, an ambush, or a feast. If they win, power will improve their stats and get them closer to the warchief spot. Power struggles are how captains navigate their position in the hierarchy of orc relations. They are also the extent of the hierarchy of orc relations, which is a shame, because they are very simple and they are not very good. Now, each power struggle has a time limit. The idea is prevention. That's meant to be your motive, and it is your mission objective. As it reads, you must stop the orc doing a thing in order to prevent them gaining power. First problem, who cares if they gain power? No amount of power will stop me from ruthlessly bullying them, and the increments of power they gain are small, so the idea of prevention is a complete misfire, and power struggles like branding are left as a toy. It's fun to watch captains fight each other, and it's nice to have an easy way to get into some captain fights, but even as a toy, power struggles struggle. Because they were designed around prevention, the mission resolves when the captain either succeeds or fails at their task. If one captain wins the duel, or the Caragor in a beast hunt is slain, there are two problems here. One, the interruption. Being pulled out of the battle to see an extensive resolution when you already know what happened because you either saw it or caused it is not only a frustrating waste of time, but it can also unfairly cause damage or cost you precious seconds in a chase, as your control is arrested before enemy combatants. 2, it doesn't even make sense. If I kill one of the orcs in a duel, the other orc is still promoted. Why? Same goes for Caragors. Bitch, I killed the beast. And I have witnesses. Get your own clout. This feeds into the first problem. I only find this frustrating because it forces me to watch the resolution. And you know what? It sucks that you have to load into a separate instance too. It seems a small thing, but the lifeblood of the Nemesis system is the small things that help you see character instead of technology. So a literal detachment from the world around you does have an impact. One Shadow of War was wise to correct. So, power struggles are decidedly mediocre. Fun scenarios weighed down by the failure of the ideas they were meant to fit into. They're toys that are sometimes fun, and I would not prefer the game without them, but it sucks they're not what they were meant to be. And we can see that the biggest and most consistent problem for all this is a lack of difficulty. That's why branding and power struggles feel like a waste of time when you're not being forced into them. But we can also see a trend, that the further we get from the game's foundation, Nirn from Udun, complex relations from simple relations, the more unfinished it seems to be. Power struggles wouldn't be very good even if they made sense. Branding would still make the game less interesting because the advanced elements of the Nemesis system are skeletal. But will this trend continue? With Nirn conquered, the only thing there is to do with our army is to cross the sea and take the Black Hand's fortress. There's a fight. It's a cool one, because charging a fortress is always going to be cool. And it was a good idea to script in a final showdown with whoever the systems have determined to be your nemesis. For me, it was a saddening demonstration of the game's flaws. I had no nemesis. I didn't even remember who that orc was. An empty name to guard an empty fortress. Only the puppeteered corpses stand guard here. It's a very strong atmosphere, perfectly fitting for the magician of the Black Captains, the Tower of Sauron. And god fucking damn do they get this cutscene right. He toys with you, rumbling casual threats, meeting your sword unbothered and unblinking in his throne. He is here to pull you apart, but the knife cuts so much deeper his way. Celebrimbor chose you, and he can release you at any time. He finds such satisfaction in it, and you can hear these nuances, the hate for you, the pleasure of harming you so easily, the simple fact of his intimidation, because J.B. Blanc is a voice actor on par with Troy Baker and Alistair Duncan, and he captures magnificent evil in every word.
And I will deliver you to the Dark Lord, unspoiled.
We bow to no one.
The Dark Lord forgives you, Celebrimbor. Return to him and cast off this human corpse. As you wish.
You just want to see more of the tower, or for him to be honored with a fight worthy of his presence. Sorry to disappoint. The arena is the fortress. You are to stealth drain him 3 times. If he sees you first, you will be drained. I needed a YouTube video to learn that because this is among the most forgiving stealth systems in the industry. The fight will be over in moments. The tower then cosplays Yoroth and gets stabbed to death in a cutscene. There is no curse in Elvish, Entish, or the tongues of men for this treachery, but I'll settle with suck my fucking balls. Celebrimbor's deception is addressed with appropriate anger. It's true, he can let Talion die, but do we not still want revenge? Only the Black Hand remains, and so their relationship continues unaffected. There is no consequence, small or large, in this game or the next game, of this grievous betrayal beyond a 15-second spat. What was the point? Nirn is ransacked on our return. Lithariel's home is abandoned. We will never learn what happened to her. But we don't have time to care. Mount Doom erupts. Sauron is awake. It's one more charge of armies at the Black Gate, and it both succeeds and fails in ways the last one did not. The charge has you on a Caragor, but its speed is quickly made a problem, because the talons of the Black Hand need to introduce themselves. So, having ridden your Caragor halfway into the field, or perhaps even penetrated their line, you stop to chat, completely undermining the momentum of the charge. It happens again with with every talon, with every death, and for every effect triggered, even on your allies, and so the battle goes on to be constantly interrupted. What works is the presence of Sauron. Shrill screams pierce the air, whispers of black speech and wildly roars boom across the battlefield. It's got problems, but anticlimax is not one of them. Yet. Celebrimbor mentions as we climb the Black Gate that Sauron is unable to take physical form without the ring, or the Ringmaker. Quick reminder, Celebrimbor is the Ringmaker, so we see the Black Hand's plan. Do a blood ritual, summon Celebrimbor, bring Sauron back. But there is a bit of a problem here. First off, how long have you been sitting on this information, Brimster? We're going to the Black Hand, and what he needs is you. Do you have a plan? I'm sure nothing bad will happen since we don't have a plan. Ah, fuck.
So be it.
Return to me.
The sudden raising of the stakes helps ease the wound of the Black Hand almost instantly exiting the story, with only 3 lines of speech as a goodbye, but another wound is soon to be opened. Sauron Reborn is slain in a 15-second QuickTime event, and the Black Hand, in the aftermath, still lies still. We are denied our revenge. Yeah, it's as bad as they say. And then it gets worse. Valinor awaits, Celebrimbor says longingly, but it's Talion who suggests they stay in the living world. Could you rest for eternity, knowing you had a chance to stop him, and did nothing? A good question, but why is it coming from Talion? Talion is here to avenge his family and to return to them. He has helped others at times, but what indication has there been that he would go on for what could be a century or 1,000 years, just because it's right? What great change occurred between his anger at Celebrimbor for not allowing him to die, and his decision here, a mission later? It's not a character arc, it's a sudden shift pulled from nothing to artificially create momentum for the sequel. And so are his final words, that the time has come for a new ring. What? That's not Talion speaking, it's Monolith, and what they should have said is sorry. The only good thing about these final moments is the song that plays in the credits. Shadow of Mordor is an embarrassment of a revenge story, and a victory of a revenge game, a conjunction of extremes made possible by the fact that it is a video game, and it doesn't need the script to tell a story. The catharsis comes when Talion's butchering orcs in random battles, not from its aimless plot threads or its 20-second boss fights or its absent villains, or its kills that happen in cutscenes or its nemesis who kills himself. The Black Hand is in the first cutscene and the last cutscene. It's a fucking revenge story, and you spend more time prancing about with Torvin for a trinket than engaging even indirectly with all 3 Black Captains combined. It's entertaining, and it never feels like it's getting in your way, so like many of Mordor's weak points, I would not prefer the game without it. But it is an insubstantial, forgettable mess, unworthy of the story told in every moment of unscripted play. Now we'll return to it one more time. You would expect Shadow of Mordor to have a strong endgame, not because of an abundance of side missions, which in this game are just a series of basic challenges, but because of the Nemesis system and its infinite dynamism, and it's true, and it is remarkable. I know I've said it before, but holding up to repetition is kind of the idea. It is remarkable how long the Nemesis system remains strong. 3 playthroughs, hours into the endgame, and it still doesn't feel repetitive. It still immerses and excites me when a captain turns up when I least expect it, and it still hits like nothing else to beat them. But of course, we can't ignore the matter of doing anything but beating them. If you were struggling to get the best out of the Nemesis system before, then your success with the endgame will depend entirely on how conscious you are of the problem, because the endgame provides you with the best opportunities you're ever going to get to address it. But there is something that makes it very easy to nail the coffin shut. The nails in this metaphor are the progression systems. There's a lot of them. They're quite rewarding. But this is a game that finds it difficult to be difficult with no upgrades. With them? Just bear in mind that I'm being serious. So to start us off, Talion gains the ability to tank a hit without dropping the combo. Critical strikes start awarding 3 to your combo instead of 2, whilst the combo charge requirement is lowered from 8 to 5. And that combo charge can be spent twice, and even if you don't spend it, you're still stronger, because the charged sword now deals more damage. I've already mentioned Shadow Mount, a 6-story war machine for 2 of your 14 total elf shot. Your slow-mo time for aiming will double, and your draw speed will be cut in half. And then, there are the runes. Dropped from every captain after death, each of your 3 weapons can have 5 runes equipped. They can restore slow-mo, reduce costs, improve damage, or even allow you to hang on to your combo for longer. The These bonuses are significant, and you can have 15 of them. And then there's the weaponry forging. Your reward for completing the side missions, which given their relatively low abundance is not hard to do, is a legendary sword, bow, and dagger, each of which have an ultimate ability on a long cooldown. The sword grants instant executions, the bow grants infinite focus and ammo, whilst the dagger renders you invisible. You can also double Talion's health bar. You can also stun enemies when you vault over them, for free. I'm not making this up. This is what happens if you just use the progression systems. Guess what happens if you grind for the best runes? And it was hard to die with no upgrades. Now, I wouldn't know. This is 10 times as impactful as anything in Arkham, and twice what you'd see in Assassin's Creed. This is a game that is too easy, that gives you every opportunity to make it massively easier. And I don't blame the progression. The progression's immensely rewarding. I blame the context that makes it poisonous, and that if you want to see the best of this game, you have to dodge Monolith's contradictory design like bullets in the Matrix. Well, here's how it's done. Don't use the fucking progression systems. Step 2 is using death threats, a late game ability that allows you to dominate any orc and make him send a message to a captain of your choice. I'm coming to Keller Brim Batista bomb your bitch ass, so clench up and watch out. The captain will gain strengths and health and keep himself protected by a gang at all times. If you beat him anyway, there's a 40% chance he'll drop an epic rune. But of course, that's not the point. Death threats are a brilliant idea. This was the one way self-restriction could play into the revenge fantasy instead of against it, and it enhances the rivalry that Shadow of Mordor thrives on twice over. Why did they leave it so late? Who fucking knows? But the orcs that spawn in the endgame are the toughest they'll ever be, the most strengths, the fewest weaknesses. So, death threat a war chief. Fight him and his gang and all his bodyguards. That's difficulty in Shadow of Mordor. Sometimes, I lost, which is why all my best memories of the Nemesis system come from this part of the game. All the captains whose names I can remember. I remember how Takra the Brave would always find me when I was fighting another captain, and that would always turn the tide. I remember the satisfaction of crossing names off a list until I got down to him. You have to push Shadow of Mordor closer to its potential, crank it into place and smack it on the side like a faulty TV set. And it sucks, because no matter how you slice it, that will leave most people behind. But if you go to the trouble, it's worth your while. When it comes to revenge, there's nothing else like it. Well, there is one thing like it. Its sequel. The Shadow of War looms large over Mordor. It's in this game that Monolith's ambitions were realized, and according to most, successfully so. What was once a sandbox is now a mechanic. It has a story that is not a disaster, a soundtrack that makes itself known, more maps, more animals, more length, more expansions, and even more to the Nemesis system. It addresses much of what was wrong with its humble prototype, and that puts this game in a strange situation. Besides completionism, why play Shadow of Mordor if you could play Shadow of War? My answer is focus. Shadow of Mordor in a way that a game as ambitious and multifaceted as War could never be, in a way that no other game is about revenge. If you make it so, it is the best revenge game ever made. Because you're not in a vast world of magic and fantasy, you're in the mud, rain and grit. Because there is so little artistic or mechanical that distracts from its center of revenge, that does not in fact enhance it. Because you can turn it on, walk in any direction and live out a revenge story, be it through the Nemesis system or the unparalleled catharsis of defeating a single enemy. Mordor goes hard, and it goes nowhere else. And if that's somewhere you're in the mood to go, then a pretty good game might actually be one of the best there is. The time has come for a new way to learn about quantum mechanics. Complex shit is interesting. It's also complex as shit, which makes learning it a painful and inaccessibly time-consuming process, not helped along by unintuitive terminology, assumptions of base knowledge that vary from course to course, teachers who couldn't explain their way out of a speeding ticket to Silverstone, and the agonizing limits of your own pathetic brain. If only there was a way to get around these hurdles, that would be brilliant. Brilliant.org creates clarity, and in doing so makes learning reasonable for the busy, or let's face it, the impatient. What's actually brilliant about Brilliant is the interactivity of the courses. You have to solve problems along with the lesson, which keeps you engaged, satisfied with your learning, and ensures you can't fly through the text slides with a half understanding. If you'd be called a nerd for publicly admitting your interest, there's a course here on Brilliant. Computational biology, vector calculus, artificial intelligence, and a bunch of other words they probably made up, often featuring known YouTube goats like Sabina Hossenfelder and real engineering. You can go to brilliant.org/whitelight for a 30-day free trial of unlimited access, and the first 200 people will get 20% off a yearly subscription. Special thanks go out to L. Hudson, Lex Williams, Andre Baltuta, Holy Shift, Dennis Williams, Combat Wombat, John Lemley, Shade, Joshua W. Schreiner, Bozian, Dylan Schaefer Murphy, Warthol, The Last Great Opium Den. I joined Tier 3 because I wanted to hear Whitelight say this out loud. Dan Walker, Newts, Bracken Hock, Nathan, Attila, Caleb Finnemore, DJ, Chino, Chase Baker, Eli Weaver, G. Series, William Vossler, Joe Simmons, I Pay My Cam Girl So Why Not You, Navy Husky, Save, MT the Poet, Voy, Deluxo, Calvin Black, Dr. Pavel, The Wayfinder 12, John C., Corey Walterbeek, Hidibari, Anton, Floyd Dibben, Storyteller Max, Monochrome Only, Roborunner, Jack, Brybase, Milo W., Jason H., Shahzabe Arshad Mirza, Purple PP, Pitstab, Instvent, Joshua Lovejoy, Vincent DeLuca, Veda, Jake, Uncle High Poggers, Never Yatis, and Miguel Pereza.